The Xelarians Dominion had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, their grip unshaken by any species foolish enough to resist. They were massive, towering beings with hardened exoskeletons, 4 powerful arms, and minds sharpened by centuries of warfare. Their empire had expanded without challenge, crushing weak civilizations beneath their feet and enslaving any race that lacked the strength to resist. To them, war was not just a necessity, it was a way of life, a test of dominance that decided who was worthy to exist and who was not. They had conquered countless worlds, bending them to their will with overwhelming force, and in all those years, no enemy had ever stood against them for long. When they first learned of a small, insignificant species living on the edge of the galaxy, they barely paid attention. The humans, as they called themselves, were nothing more than a primitive nuisance, a lesser race that had somehow managed to reach the stars without true strength. The Xelarian Council reviewed reports of this species and laughed. Insects, they scoffed. They will fall within days. Without hesitation, the Dominion dispatched a fleet, a force so powerful that most species would have surrendered at the mere sight of it. Hundreds of warships, each armed with weapons capable of turning planets to dust, moved toward Earth, their commanders expecting nothing more than a simple conquest. The Xelarians had done this before. They would arrive, make their demands, and if the species resisted, they would wipe out their armies and take what they wanted. There was no need for diplomacy, no need for hesitation. Strength ruled the galaxy, and humanity had shown no proof that they possessed any worth. The fleet entered the Sol system undisturbed, their massive warships blotting out the sky as they positioned themselves above Earth. The Xelarian commander, a veteran of 1,000 battles, opened a transmission to the planet's leaders, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Surrender your world. Kneel before the Dominion, or be erased from existence." He expected fear. He expected desperation. What he received instead was defiance. Earth did not surrender. The humans did not kneel. Instead, they answered with a single message: "Come and take it." It was an answer that amused the Xelarians, but they failed to see the warning hidden within those words. As the first wave of troops descended onto the planet, they believed victory was already theirs. They expected the humans to scatter, to beg for mercy, to fight in desperation like all the weak species before them. But what they encountered was something entirely different. The humans did not run. They did not break. They fought with a ferocity unlike anything the Xelarians had ever seen. Cities turned into war zones, streets became death traps, and every human soldier fought as if their life alone could determine the fate of their world. They did not rely on advanced technology or overwhelming firepower. They used strategy, adaptability, and sheer willpower. They were outmatched in weapons, but not in spirit. The Xelarians, for the first time, felt something they had never known before: resistance. The war should have lasted days, but weeks passed, and the Xelarians found themselves trapped in a battle they could not win. Their superior forces were bogged down in endless ambushes. Every city they took cost them 10 times the number of troops they expected. Their war machines were hijacked, their supply lines cut, and their soldiers hunted in the ruins of a world that refused to bow. The Xelarians had never faced an enemy that could adapt so quickly. Every tactic they used was countered. Every strength they relied on was exploited. They did not understand how humans could fight without fear, how they could stand against an enemy so much stronger than them. And then, the humans did something that truly shook the Xelarians to their core. They captured their technology. For all their arrogance, the Xelarians had never considered the possibility that these insects could learn. But the humans were not just warriors. They were inventors, thinkers, and strategists. Within weeks, they had studied Xelarian weaponry, understood it, and then turned it against them. The aliens watched in horror as human engineers modified their energy rifles, as their armored vehicles were stripped down and rebuilt to be more efficient, as their own warships were boarded, hijacked, and used to attack them. The Xelarians had always believed that their technology was their greatest advantage, but now it was being used to tear their forces apart. This was no longer a simple conquest. It was turning into a nightmare. Panic spread among the Dominion's forces. Reports came in from the front lines of entire battalions being wiped out in the dead of night. Their bases were infiltrated, their officers assassinated, and their ships disabled before they could even fire a shot. And then something even more terrifying happened. The war was no longer just on Earth. Human ships, built from stolen Xelarian technology, began to appear in space. They were smaller, faster, and armed with weapons modified in ways the Dominion had never thought possible. The Xelarian fleet, once confident in its superiority, now found itself being hunted in the darkness of space. The insects had become something far more dangerous. They had become a storm that could not be stopped. The High Council of the Dominion could no longer ignore the truth. They had underestimated humanity. They had called them insects, but now those insects had torn their fleets apart, shattered their armies, and spread fear throughout their empire. The Xelarians had never known fear. They had never known defeat. But now, as human warships broke through their defenses, as their colonies fell one by one, they finally understood. The humans were not insects. They were something far worse. They were a force that could not be broken, a species that would rather burn the stars than kneel. Desperation gripped the Dominion. The Xelarians had to make a choice: continue fighting and risk extinction, or surrender to the very species they had mocked. The High Council, once so certain of their dominance, now faced a reality they had never thought possible. The humans had changed everything. The war had not only destroyed the illusion of the Dominion's invincibility, but it had also inspired others. Across the galaxy, species that had once been enslaved began to rise up. The arrogance of the Xelarians had been their downfall, and now, as the human fleet approached their homeworld, they had to make a choice. In the end, they did the one thing they had sworn never to do. They bowed. The message was sent across the galaxy. The Xelarian Dominion had surrendered. The war was over, but the lesson remained. Never underestimate humanity. They were not insects. They were not weak. They were a force beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, the entire universe knew what happened when you dared to challenge them. The galactic sovereignty had ruled the known universe for over 10,000 years, an empire so vast that no species dared challenge its authority. Its rulers, the Xelarians, were a race of ancient beings who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall under their watch. To them, war was a distant memory, something beneath them, a barbaric concept that had long been replaced by absolute control. They expanded not through battle, but through domination, by enforcing laws so strict, so absolute, that no race would ever dare to resist. And for centuries, their rule remained uncontested, their power unquestioned. But their arrogance had made them blind. In their complacency, they had forgotten what true war looked like. They had forgotten that power was not just about control. It was about resilience, about the will to fight when all seemed lost. And it was this mistake that would lead them to their greatest downfall. When they first encountered humanity, the Xelarians barely acknowledged them. The humans were a new species, young and inexperienced, barely having ventured beyond their own solar system. The sovereignty's spies reported that while humanity was resourceful and adaptable, they were small in number, technologically primitive compared to the vast might of the empire. The Xelarians Council, made up of the oldest and wisest of their kind, dismissed the humans entirely. They are nothing more than an inconvenience. One of them scoffed. Like all those before them, they will submit or be erased. And so, without hesitation, the order was given. A single fleet was dispatched, carrying the sovereignty's demand. Humanity was to surrender immediately or face annihilation. It was a decision made with absolute certainty, with the confidence of a race that had never known defeat. They had made their first mistake. The fleet arrived in human space with the full weight of the empire behind it. The Xelarians ships, massive and imposing, dwarfed the small human vessels that patrolled the outer colonies. Their message was simple: surrender or die. The Jorvax commander, a being who had overseen the conquest of 100 worlds, expected no resistance. He had seen it too many times before: lesser species who tried to fight back, only to be crushed beneath the might of the sovereignty. But when the humans received the ultimatum, they did not beg for mercy. They did not attempt to negotiate. Instead, they sent a response that confused the Jorvax commander. It was just 2 words: "We refuse." At first, the Jorvax found this amusing. They assumed it was the arrogance of a young species, one that had not yet understood the true power of the sovereignty. A lesson would need to be taught. The fleet moved forward, targeting the nearest human colony, a small settlement on the edge of their territory. The attack was swift and brutal, a display of overwhelming force meant to send a message. The colony was reduced to ash, its people slaughtered without hesitation. The sovereignty's ships hovered over the burning remains, waiting for humanity to understand its place. But humanity did not kneel. Instead, they declared war. For the first time in millennia, the sovereignty found itself in an actual battle. The humans did not fight like the other species before them. They did not rely on numbers or brute force. They fought with strategy, with unpredictability, using tactics the Jorvax had never encountered before. They struck from the shadows, their ships smaller but faster, their weapons not as powerful but devastatingly precise. They did not engage in direct confrontation. They used their intelligence, turning every battle into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Jorvax fleet, so confident in its superiority, found itself struggling against an enemy that refused to fight on their terms. But it was not just their tactics that shocked the sovereignty. It was their resilience. Every battle should have been a victory for the Jorvax, yet every time they won, the humans came back stronger. They learned from their mistakes at an alarming speed. They adapted, improved, and turned the enemy's own weapons against them. The Jorvax had believed the war would be over in days. Instead, weeks turned into months, and the humans were still fighting. The sovereignty had never encountered a species that could endure so much loss and yet continue to push forward. It was not just their strength that made them dangerous. It was their refusal to accept defeat. As the war raged on, something even more troubling happened. The Jorvax began to lose control. Their empire, once so stable, was now shaking. Other species, long oppressed under their rule, began to take notice. They watched as the humans stood against a force that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. And they realized something the Jorvax had feared for so long. If the humans could fight back, so could they. Uprisings began across the empire, rebellions spreading like wildfire. What had once been an unbreakable rule was now being questioned. The war with humanity had sparked something far greater than the Jorvax could have ever imagined. Their greatest mistake was not attacking the humans. It was assuming they were weak. The final blow came when the humans did something no one had thought possible. They took the fight to the heart of the empire. Using stolen technology, they launched an assault on the sovereignty's central stronghold, a fortress world that had never been breached in all of history. The Jorvax had believed it to be impenetrable, guarded by the most powerful fleet in existence. But they had underestimated the humans one last time. The attack was swift and brutal, a coordinated strike that shattered the fortress's defenses. By the time the Jorvax realized what was happening, it was already too late. Their homeworld was burning. Their empire was collapsing. And standing amidst the wreckage were the very beings they had once dismissed as insignificant. In the end, the sovereignty had no choice. Their empire was broken, their fleets shattered, their people terrified. The war was lost. And so, after 10,000 years of unchallenged rule, the mighty Jorvax sovereignty surrendered. The galaxy they had once controlled was no longer theirs. It belonged to the humans now, the very species they had once thought unworthy of notice. As the last remnants of the sovereignty faded into history, one truth remained. The Jorvax had made many mistakes in their arrogance, but their first mistake had been the greatest of all. They had believed humanity was weak. They had thought the war would be easy. They had assumed that power alone was enough to ensure victory. But they had been wrong. Humanity had shown them a lesson they would never forget. The war had not just been about survival. It had been about proving a point, about showing the universe that humanity was not a species to be ignored, not a race to be conquered. And now, the galaxy would never forget the name of the ones who had brought down an empire. Humanity had won, and the Jorvax would spend the rest of their days knowing exactly why. For centuries, the Galactic Dominion had ruled with absolute power, expanding across the stars, conquering and enslaving weaker species without mercy. They were feared by all, their massive fleets enforcing their will across the galaxy. When they first encountered humans, they had thought little of them. A small, fragile species from an insignificant planet called Earth, primitive in technology, weak in numbers, and unworthy of consideration. The Dominion did what they always did. They demanded submission. But humans refused. And so, the war began. At first, the Dominion believed victory would be swift. Their fleets, numbering in the thousands, descended upon human colonies, razing entire worlds to the ground. The initial battles were brutal, with humanity suffering immense losses. Cities burned, millions perished, and Earth itself stood on the edge of destruction. The Dominion's supreme leader, Grand Warlord Xelarians, watched from his throne, confident that resistance would soon crumble. But what the Dominion failed to understand was that humanity had something no other species possessed: the ability to adapt, to endure, and to fight with a determination that defied logic. The humans did not surrender. They did not beg for mercy. Instead, they disappeared into the void, abandoning their shattered worlds and vanishing into deep space. The Dominion assumed they had been broken, that they had accepted their fate. But the truth was far more dangerous. Humanity was not defeated. They were preparing. And when they returned, they would strike harder than the Dominion could ever imagine. For years, the galaxy remained silent. The Dominion continued to expand, ruling with arrogance, believing the war had ended. But whispers began to spread. Supply lines started vanishing. Outposts went dark. Dominion warships, patrolling the far edges of their territory, simply disappeared without a trace. At first, the leaders dismissed it as minor resistance, insignificant in the grand scale of their empire. But then the attacks escalated. Entire Dominion fleets were ambushed and annihilated by enemies that seemed to appear from nowhere. Space stations were infiltrated and sabotaged, their defenses turned against them. Strategic planets, once thought secure, erupted into flames overnight. It was precise, it was merciless, and it was terrifying. The Dominion had faced many rebellions before, but this was something different. This was not a desperate struggle for survival. This was war. And it was being fought with a level of strategy and brutality that the Dominion had never seen before. Humanity had returned, and they were not here to negotiate. They were here for revenge. The Dominion, unprepared for such a counterattack, struggled to respond. Their fleets, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer firepower, found themselves fighting a ghost. The humans did not engage in traditional battles. They struck from the shadows, crippling supply chains, targeting command centers, and eliminating key figures within the Dominion's leadership. Their weapons had evolved, their technology now rivaling that of the most advanced empires in the galaxy. But their most dangerous weapon was not their firepower, it was their will. Unlike other species that had been conquered and broken, humans fought not just to survive, but to win. The war escalated faster than the Dominion could react. Every victory they claimed was met with another devastating loss. Their fleets were stretched thin, their forces divided, and fear began to spread among their ranks. The once mighty Dominion, a force that had ruled unchallenged for centuries, was now on the defensive. Grand Warlord Xelarians, once so confident in his empire's invincibility, now found himself facing the unthinkable. Humanity was winning. Desperation led to foolish decisions. The Dominion, in a final act of cruelty, launched an assault on Earth itself, hoping to destroy the homeworld of their greatest enemy and end the war in one decisive strike. Their fleet, the largest ever assembled, descended upon the planet, unleashing destruction on a scale never seen before. They expected Earth to crumble, for humanity to finally break. But instead, they found themselves trapped. The humans had been waiting. The moment the Dominion fleet arrived, a massive counterattack was launched. Hidden fleets emerged from deep space, surrounding the enemy from all sides. Planetary defenses, once thought destroyed, came online, unleashing devastating firepower. The skies above Earth became a battlefield of fire and metal as Dominion ships were torn apart by human forces. What was meant to be humanity's final defeat had become the Dominion's greatest disaster. As the battle raged, Grand Warlord Cyrov watched in horror as his fleet was annihilated. His commanders, once loyal and fearless, now spoke in panic, begging for orders that no longer mattered. The humans were relentless, showing no mercy, no hesitation. They had suffered too much, lost too many. And now, they were making sure that the Dominion would never threaten them again. The war did not end with a treaty. There were no negotiations, no surrender. Humanity did not seek peace. They sought justice. They hunted down every last remnant of the Dominion, erasing their rule from the galaxy. The species once thought weak had become the most feared force in existence. The Dominion was gone, wiped from history, and in its place stood a new power, one that would never be underestimated again. The galaxy would remember this war for eternity, not just because of the battles, the destruction, or the fall of an empire, but because it was the moment the galaxy learned the truth about humanity. They were not just survivors. They were warriors, and when they struck back, they did not stop until their enemies were nothing but ashes. For as long as the galaxy had known war, the galactic hegemony had remained undefeated. Their rule spanned thousands of systems, their armies numbered in the trillions, and their fleets darkened the skies of every conquered world. They had fought countless rebellions, crushed ambitious warlords, and turned entire civilizations into dust. To challenge them was to invite destruction, for no species had ever stood against them and survived. It was an unshakable truth, a law of existence, until humanity arrived. At first, the hegemony barely acknowledged the humans. They were a young species, new to the stars, insignificant compared to the vastness of the empire. But when the humans refused to kneel, when they defied orders to surrender their worlds, the hegemony decided to make an example of them. They sent a fleet to Earth, a fleet large enough to reduce the planet to ruins. The message was clear: obedience or extinction. But the unthinkable happened. The fleet never returned. At first, the hegemony assumed the mission had been delayed. Then they suspected communication failures. But as days turned to weeks, it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong. Earth was still standing. The fleet was gone, and humanity was silent. The hegemony, enraged by the defiance, sent another fleet, twice as large, 3 times as powerful. This time, they broadcasted their approach, warning humanity of their impending doom. But once again, they vanished. Not a single ship returned. Panic spread through the empire. How was this possible? No enemy had ever resisted them. No force had ever destroyed their fleets so effortlessly. The High Command convened, debating theories. Some believed the humans had access to ancient, forbidden technology. Others whispered of unknown alien allies. But the truth was far worse. Humanity was not just defending itself. It was hunting. The attacks began in the outer systems. Remote hegemony outposts went silent. Convoys carrying vital resources simply disappeared. Then major industrial worlds found themselves under siege. No one saw the attackers arrive. No one detected their ships. But within hours, entire planets fell into chaos. Defenses shut down mysteriously, orbital stations were torn apart, and governors were found dead in their own chambers. The hegemony's mightiest warriors, bred for battle, and armed with the finest weapons in existence, were found executed with precision. No survivors, no mercy. The High Command scrambled to respond. They mobilized their Grand Armada, sending it to reinforce their core worlds. But then the impossible occurred. The capital world itself, HFY Prime, the heart of the Empire, came under attack. Not by a massive fleet, not by an overwhelming force, but by something far more terrifying. Humans had infiltrated the planet. They'd bypassed every defense, every security measure, and struck deep into the heart of the Empire's government. Palaces burned, command centers exploded, and the Supreme Chancellor, the ruler of the hegemony for over 1,000 years, was found dead in his chambers, a single bullet in his skull. The government collapsed overnight. Without leadership, the fleets hesitated, the armies lost coordination, and the once invincible empire fractured. Humanity had done what was thought impossible. They had brought the hegemony to its knees. As the surviving leaders of the hegemony fled into the void, they finally understood the truth. They had never been the true rulers of the galaxy. They had only been its tyrants, its oppressors. And humanity had come not just to fight, but to erase them from history. For centuries, the Xelarian Dominion had ruled the stars with absolute authority, believing themselves to be the superior race, the chosen rulers of the galaxy. Their empire stretched across thousands of systems, their war fleets crushed any resistance, and their technology was unmatched by any known species. They saw themselves as invincible, their dominance unquestionable, their power eternal. But arrogance had blinded them, and they never considered the possibility of true opposition. That was their first mistake. When humanity first emerged into the galactic scene, the Xelarians laughed. A primitive race, barely stepping beyond their home system. No genetic enhancements, no cybernetic augmentations, nothing that impressed the Dominion. The Xelarians dismissed them as another weak species, another civilization that would soon kneel or be wiped from existence. When humanity refused to bow, the Dominion sent a single fleet to remind them of their place. The Xelarians had conquered countless worlds before. This was just another routine extermination. They thought nothing of it. But then the fleet disappeared. At first, the Dominion assumed some kind of malfunction, maybe an unfortunate accident in deep space. They sent scouts to investigate, but those ships never returned either. The Dominion still didn't see the threat. They sent another fleet, this time larger, filled with their most experienced commanders. But then, silence. No distress signals. No wreckage. Nothing. The fleet was gone. The arrogant rulers of the galaxy had no explanation. Panic spread through the High Council. The Dominion had never faced an enemy that could simply erase their fleets. They demanded answers. How could a species as young as humanity pose any threat? The arrogance that had kept them blind was now their greatest weakness. Even as their fear grew, they refused to believe that a lesser species could be responsible. It had to be something else. Perhaps a hidden faction, an unknown empire waiting in the shadows. But the truth was far worse. Humanity was not just fighting back. They were hunting the hunters. The Xelarians soon found their supply lines cut, their outposts abandoned, their colonies mysteriously going dark. Their most secure installations, hidden deep in the void, were breached without warning. Their mighty generals, who had once commanded fear and respect, were found dead, eliminated with surgical precision. The Xelarian military scrambled to respond, sending fleets to protect their territories. But they could never catch the enemy. Humanity never engaged in direct battles. They struck and vanished. It was as if they were ghosts, moving unseen, always one step ahead. Then the unthinkable happened. The capital world of the Dominion, HFY Prime, came under attack. Not by a grand armada, not by an overwhelming force, but by something far worse. Humanity had infiltrated their homeworld. Xelarian defense systems, once thought impenetrable, were shut down in an instant. Communication networks collapsed, and planetary shields failed. The mighty war machines of the Dominion, symbols of their supremacy, were turned against them. The High Council, once so sure of their eternal rule, found themselves helpless in their own chambers. The final humiliation came when the leader of the Xelarians, Supreme Chancellor Vorthal, was dragged before the humans. He had once stood above all, his voice enough to command the destruction of entire civilizations. Now he was nothing. The humans did not torture him. They did not make him beg. They simply looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. And then, with a single shot, they ended the rule of arrogance. The Dominion collapsed overnight. Without leadership, without fleets, without the illusion of invincibility, their empire crumbled. The species they had enslaved rose up, their former allies abandoned them, and their once glorious cities burned. Humanity had not just defeated them, they had erased the arrogance of the Xelarians from history. And in the void where the Dominion once stood, only one truth remained. The age of human dominance had begun.